So I don't know where your sources are coming from, that there's a lot of people out there that require additional information. I do think that some of your questions are spot on, and that's why we should continue. I wanted to continue the conversation. But I do think when we get into the concept of talking about whether 50% or 90% or it's MERV 11 or MERV 13, I think those kind of details are not necessarily relevant right now, unless the superintendent's to tell me that he's received 25 emails regarding the reopening plan for further information regarding these things. You're right, there are 5,400 people that will try and get back in these buildings, staff and students, come September, come next week. And I want to make sure that we have a reopening plan that we know today is going to be impacted by what they do at the state level, what they do at the federal level, and whatever they decide to do at the county level. And we are going to have to react to that.
I want to add something to that. I think if I could paraphrase what I'm hearing is that Rachel has a concern just to make sure that the overfiltration is circulating properly and that there's another measure of safety. And so by asking the question, I think these questions, she's just looking for reassurance that that's the case. And I think that's what I'm hearing with that.
And reassurance is good, but I think as a board, we're just looking at the big picture, Doug.
Yeah.
We're just looking at, I know that Mr. Whitmore is going to have the MERV, whatever, and some of these questions are going to get answered when they get back at school. Having a child who is in choir, they're provided with the masks, and we're looking at the big picture right now. And the big picture is to get all these kids back at school. And this is a reopening plan that is subject to change, subject to more guidance. Our new governor said she might be delivering some more mandates. This is a blueprint that's going to be changing, and this is what we're going to be working with. So this is the picture we have to look at. How much more detail are we going to have to ask? And I want to keep the conversation open because, yes, I want to keep the children safe. Yes, I want to make sure the staff is safe. But we don't have a crystal ball to make sure everyone's safe. We're going to do the best we can, and this is the plan. So how many more questions are we going to go through?
In the circumstance that we're in with the variant and the rising positivity rate, the numbers that we're facing going back to school are very different than they were a year ago, and we are having distance and more than doubling students. So my very fervent hope is that this is successful and our children and our staff are safe and that school can continue. And it's not going to behoove anybody to have to close down a classroom or close down a school or see that the number and spread is occurring in schools. So my purpose in asking the questions is that with respect to the recommendations in CDC and New York State Ed guidance, the ones that district is not recommending is just to explore why not now if it's not that difficult. If adding in standalone, a question I would ask Andy would be, has an engineer recommended to us any additional things to do?
That our district architect has consulted with New York State Facilities Planning. They've attended seminars on this at Syracuse University, and we've had our contractors who service our equipment, and we are at the highest level of filtration that our systems can provide. If we provide a higher level, it'll reduce airflow and be counterproductive. They are very comfortable. We are drawing in a great amount of fresh air constantly. That they are very comfortable. Our ventilation is working, is fine. And we can, pulling information off the website is not how we do it. We go to New York State Facilities Planning. They have the code, and we have worked with them, and everybody is very confident that we're doing everything we can, and we have more than adequate ventilation.
Yeah, I've cited an ASHRAE standard that's cited by the CDC. It's not pulling something off the website. Were there any recommendations to put any additional standalone units in building spaces where the standard's not met?
was no recommendations for that, and there was actually some recommendations not to do certain types of those standalone filters.
Okay. My last major area of concern is with vaccination, which the CDC and the New York State Ed recommend be encouraged, certainly. And so I'm wondering, is there any consideration, I think last meeting you had shared, Mr. Wright, excuse me, that our staff is 70% vaccinated and our teachers 90% vaccinated. Those about the right numbers?
Yes.
Okay. Have you considered the test or vaccinate standard, which would be that for anyone who's not tested, anyone who's not vaccinated, that they would submit to once a week testing?
No,
Okay, why not?
because I don't think it's appropriate for superintendents and boards to make those determinations. I think, you know, it's always been the position of superintendents throughout the county that if that type of a mandate is going to come about, that it should be determined at the state level, and that it should be mandated in law so that it's applied consistently across the state. And I'm sure you probably are aware that that's a conversation that the governor's having right now, I think, examining the feasibility of that type of a mandate. I think that conversation is connected to, in part, to the conversation around testing as well. But my recommendation would not be to this board that as a single entity, as a school district, that we take that step. Again, I think that we should wait for further guidance to come from the state and our local Department of Health.
So I have 3 children who could be taking full capacity buses. If the bus driver's not vaccinated, I would feel more comfortable knowing that that person is tested weekly, and I would take part in doing that. You don't think that, I mean, I think that that would be something that a locally controlled school district could decide. You don't agree?
I don't think that it's something that a local school district should decide, and I also would question the legality of making that type of decision at this table.
I do not believe the school board has the authority to impose vaccination requirements or testing requirements. I believe that the vaccination requirements that do exist are the product of legislation that was adopted, and even the legislation gets tested constantly in terms of the state authority. I don't believe that the Board of Education has the authority to impose vaccination requirements or testing requirements in the absence of a state guidance.
Okay, I think we disagree about that, because my understanding is that you can require test or vaccinate, not require. I'm not proposing require vaccinate. And we have
The school board is really a creature of the education department. The commissioner is the head of the education department. And I don't believe that the district, as I said, to repeat myself, would have the authority to impose those types of restrictions unilaterally. It's my opinion.
Okay. And the symptom screener, last year, everyone who came into school did a symptom screener to state that their children were feeling well that day. Not continuing that this year?
No, and there are a couple different reasons for that, and the main reason it's not a requirement is because it's widely known that school districts would have extreme difficulty trying to enforce it. So, to give you an example, in this building, in the high school, even when we only had 1/3 of our students here, on a daily basis, you had 100 to 150 students who didn't complete the screening. And so you had to deploy staff to track students down after they were already in the building, sitting in class, and then you would have to screen them here. If you triple that number, then you're going to have a lot more students that you're trying to track down, and you simply wouldn't have the capacity to do it. So even if you even if you offered the same program and asked parents to screen, there would be no accountability as far as completing the screener, and essentially it wouldn't be a real efficient way of keeping students and staff safe and catching cases before they come into the building. So the idea is to put our energy into communication with parents around monitoring symptoms and not sending students to school when they're feeling ill, and having the same conversation with staff around monitoring their own symptoms and not coming in if they're not feeling well.
I think on the other end too, it could stop some parents from sending their kids by mistake. I know for me, sometimes it caused me to say, oh, wait a second, kids, you guys, how are you feeling? Anything up? How about the value of it from the perspective of it just forces the family to take that moment and check out how the kids are feeling before they go.
I don't want to be redundant, but the reason that we didn't implement it is because we don't see value in it currently as a mitigation strategy, and you'll find across the county that no other schools are implementing it.
Thank you for answering my questions.
Any other questions? So we have a motion on the floor, action pertaining to the adoption of the district's reopening plan. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Me.
Any abstentions? Right, motion carries 5-1-0. This brings us to the superintendent's report regarding a couple items.
Two items that I'd like to discuss with you tonight. One is a draft of the Board of Education workshops for the upcoming school year. Again, this is a flexible document. You don't have to take any sort of action on it. Tonight is really about getting feedback from you. If there are workshops that you don't want, then we can take them off. If there are workshops that aren't listed that you would like to have, then we can add them. And there are also some open slots later on in the year that we can utilize as well. So this is really just about presenting you the draft, getting some feedback, and then based on that feedback, we'll make any adjustments, and then we would put it back in front of you as a written item under my report at our next meeting. But this isn't a document that you have to take action on.
Can I add some things to that, Bo?
Sure.
So a couple things that I would like to see workshops on. Special education measuring for success for decision makers. So how can we get data that you're already using and do a workshop on it so that we can understand how to make sound decisions to help you? I think that would be helpful. I know there is some workshop components in there that do talk about some of those, I think maybe sub-components of that, but I would appreciate that. The other thing was vocational education. As you know, that's my area of expertise, but I'd like to see a workshop on what we're doing in the district for vocational education. If there is anything, if that's something that's possible. The other thing was, I'd like to see a workshop on how can we as a board, using Robert's Rules of Order, be more efficient and effective in communication. So using that process, if that's something we can get us to do, I think that would be beneficial. And then having a training on open meeting laws so that we're all in the same place on that process. So I think that those few items I would benefit from myself.
So my initial thoughts are your last two requests for workshops. I think that would be a conversation with the board officers and would probably be incorporated into the board training for the year, as opposed to a workshop that we typically reserve for instructional programs and school-based programs. As far as vocational education, I think that we can easily incorporate that into one of the workshops that we do around curriculum and instruction. And I think that we can hopefully have some conversation around some of the metrics that are used in determining success for special education students in November when we have the special education workshop. And then if you felt like follow-up was needed, then we can either shift some things later in the year. Like I said, we did reserve 3 open slots, so you can always move certain content back and move certain content up. But we can have an initial conversation in November, and then you guys collectively can decide if you need more information. That would be my suggestion.
Thank you.
Anybody else at this end? Jennifer?
Thank you, Diane, and I appreciate that. Just a couple of thoughts, and I'm not sure, as you just mentioned the board training, Mr. Superintendent, I think one of mine may fall into that, but I'm going to throw it out there anyways. We have tentatively scheduled a comprehensive mental wellness support and review in February. I'm hoping that we can get something on that maybe a little bit sooner in the year, especially with everybody coming back into the buildings, that maybe we could juggle. I know September is certainly not the right time, but maybe October, November, so we've got some data to be able to work with to talk about as to what's going on regarding that. That's just a calendar shift, I think. And then the other one is something that I've become aware of as we've gone through some of our earlier meetings, is just overall from a calendaring perspective, when do things need to be acted upon by the board? As an example, I think it was last month where we were talking with Andy about some of the budgetary stuff, and those decisions were already made previously before that resolution came forward. Just to kind of lay something out that would give us an idea as to what's upcoming from a year-long perspective. And the one thing that comes to my mind as we talked about at the last board meeting was the capital project vote, and understanding the layout of when do we have to make a decision on that. And I think that date was provided previously, I just didn't write it down. In order to get it to the public for a vote, and then does State Education Department, when do they factor into that process? So something along a calendar that would help a new member, I think, and that's why I think it could be board training from that perspective.
I think there was, at some point, a calendar planning tool.
Yes,
Yeah.
Karen and I just
It's
had,
exactly what you're talking about.
Karen and I had a conversation the other day. She's trying to locate, it was a particular calendar that listed all the things that had to be acted upon during the school year, who was responsible, if there was a regulation or a policy that dictated it, and then we were able to add throughout the year if there were other items that needed to be. So it's actually in the works, Mr.
Great.
Mayor, so thank you for asking about that.
Thank you very much. And then the last one that I think may be an add, and this could come in later in the year during one of our open sessions, is really understanding better from Pat's perspective, sort of the hiring cycle as to new employees coming in, the regular cycle of that, what the process is that you go through for that, if that's something that could potentially be added. That's it for me. Thank you.
Anne Marie?
So I've loved all these ideas so far. Thank you. Love to learn about those topics that were raised by my colleagues. I also would love to learn about our transportation system, our rules, the laws we're under, the 4 levels of bus runs that we have, and to really think about options for the future. Our bell times span from 7:25 in the morning to 9:30 in the morning, and my own children going to Roth got a notice about getting on a bus at 6:23, which would mean they're up by 5:30, excuse me. And I've heard of other people getting on buses in the 5 a.m., 5:55 range. I'm not sure if that's still happening or if we've been able to add runs for that, but to me it's a matter of mental health and physical wellness for our children, our students, and especially our adolescent students whose biological clocks are moving them to naturally later fall asleep times. What can we do to help them? Because the system is not centering those students' needs. I realize there's lots of challenges, but I'd love those challenges to come to the table. The other thing I have on my list is the election policies and procedures. I was reminded, President McBride, of an after-action election discussion that you had here and mentioned that you wanted to look at that again. In the course of the year, I had heard people reported irregularities, and I would like to make sure that our election process is very filled with integrity. I'd also like to know during the pandemic, the mail-in vote brought in 6,200 Rush-Henrietta voters, but the in-person vote brought in 1,700 Rush-Henrietta voters. I'm in favor of more people voting, so I'd love there to be an opportunity to talk about mail-in voting with that. The other thing I have on my list is workplace culture. I understand from Mr. McHugh, there's never been a workplace climate survey since he's been here, and maybe there's been some great things that have been happening that improve morale and relations, but also I understand that morale and relations have suffered in recent years, and so the opportunity to consider having a full workplace climate survey would be a great thing to learn about the pros and the cons, and whether that's something that the board would want to support. And the other thing on my list is food service. And I know you did a workshop on food service maybe in the last year or two. Many families, and especially from our new American families, have talked about a lack of options that fit with their dietary preferences and some religious restrictions. And I understand that, of course, our district would be aware of some of those things. I'd love to know ways that we could expand potentially the offerings for those people. My students eat a ton of vegetables, and would love to see expanded offerings there in vegetables too. Finally, I have equity and extracurriculars. So I think there is a perception, whether it's true or not true, that there are inequities in as between boys teams and girls teams, as between the dollars that are expended, on certain sports. Some arts and music families believe sports take center stage, and sports families believe that sometimes the arts and music take center stage. And I know with our priority of equity and the importance of engaging students in their school communities, I really do believe in extracurriculars and engaging as many people as possible from an inclusion perspective, and would love to know what our thinking is, what the strategies are, what the board could do to support, and what the numbers show about are there not inequities across those different categories I mentioned.
All right, everybody, that's a lot of ideas. We'll see if the superintendent, go ahead.
Yeah, what I was going to suggest is let me go back and revise the proposal. Some of the things you talked about, I think, can fit into other workshops that we've already proposed as part of certain conversations. Some will probably rest outside of that, and we can look to schedule them throughout the year. And then some of the topics that are more specific to the board and not necessarily related to what we do on a daily basis in schools, I think we'll have to have some conversation about when you would like to address some of those things.
We'll get it figured out. Did you need to say something, Scott? Okay. Anything else? All right, this brings us to the next part of your report.
Yes, again, an item that I would like to discuss to see if there is support for it in concept. You don't have to take any sort of action tonight, but what I put out there for your consideration is the possibility of adding some administrative support, utilizing some of the federal stimulus money that we have at our disposal right now. I'd like to have a focus on some of the areas in the district and some of our schools that may need added support. And this would be an appropriate expenditure for federal stimulus money. Would give us an opportunity to sort of seed this type of an endeavor, see how it works, and then the board could make a decision a couple of years in to see if you want to continue to fund it after we no longer have access to federal stimulus money. But I think that the addition of this position would allow us to add some capacity in certain parts of the district where it's needed. It would allow us to build capacity within the administrative ranks. And as I said, we would be able to reevaluate the situation after a couple of years, and then the board could make the decision at that point if you want to continue to fund the position. So I guess what I'm looking for tonight is to see if you would, in concept, be supportive of this, and then we would come back to you with a more specific proposal for the position that we would ask you to consider for approval in open session. And then if it moved forward, then we would fill the position. I open it up for comments and questions and discussion.
So are you looking for administrative support at a particular building or something to be flexible throughout the district?
We have our eye on Roth right now. But I think the nice part about doing something like this is, in the future, I view it being flexible, where you would be able to sort of rotate, you would be able to move that position where support is needed. But I think looking at it in the here and now, that's where we've had our eye in terms of where we would probably place it. I don't know, Pat, do you want to add anything? Did I leave out any details before we open? I probably should have had you weigh in before we open it up.
No, thank you. Not at all. I don't think you missed anything. The only comment I would add would be in terms of that idea of capacity building from an HR standpoint. We're always looking to develop leaders and leadership throughout the district, and I think we had two great examples this year of situations in which we were able to offer really meaningful leadership opportunities to two of our teachers who were studying to be administrators, and both of them successfully obtained assistant principalships within the district. Kiana Reeves had the opportunity to run and be the administrator for our extended year program this spring and summer, and Walter Moore had the opportunity to spend a semester out of the classroom as our additional assistant principal role in the Remote Learning Academy last school year. And it really, that leadership experience really proved, I think, to be a deciding factor in their successful candidacies as they both were hired as assistant principals.
So we would view these as professional development opportunities?
Really a leadership development opportunity, a real training ground for potential administrators, as well as Bo said, adding the capacity in a targeted way at a particular school, perhaps even a district function in a particular department, or a combination thereof that would meet the district's needs and also help us to build our bench in terms of our future leaders.
Mr. Adair has been waiting patiently.
Not sure I would call it patiently, because I've touched my microphone like a dozen times. But anyways, in concept, totally supportive of it. I do have some reservations regarding the idea of potentially having to eliminate it down the road. But I think in the previous conversation that we had surrounding this, there was some conversation that it probably would be able to be absorbed. The individual, if it was an individual placed into that, would be able to be absorbed through normal attrition, basically, from a leadership standpoint.
That is correct.
Because I totally support the concept of we need to have good bench strength out there. I mean, what everybody in this district has been through over these last 18 months recognizes as much support that we can provide to students and staff is extremely important, and I look forward to seeing what the concept actually is.
Other thoughts?
As to build the console.
Okay, then we will put pen to paper, get you the specifics, and put it back in front of you hopefully next month.
Looks like that brings us to recap. You do not have to, Mr. Dare, list all the ideas for the workshops. Just note that there are ideas. Go for it.
Madam President, I was not planning on listing out all the ideas, even though I did write them down, my handwriting is not the best. No action taken during executive session this evening. All items, especially the reopening plan, passed this evening. Reopening is September 8th. I would like to, I'm going to take the privilege of having the microphone at this point in time, and I would like to thank the superintendent, his team, for putting the plan together and getting it in front of us and getting it in front of the entire population of the district for comment during this last week or so. Also would like to thank I think Rachel and I are somewhat in a unique spot because we're new to the board, but I would like to thank the returning 4 board members in May who are here, and May's not here, for all the work that they've done during these last 18 months in keeping things held together. And certainly would like to thank Nikki and James for their previous service regarding that as well. Hats off to everybody, and I wish everybody a very successful opening day on September 8th, and look forward to hearing about it in our next board meeting.
So then I'll take a motion to adjourn the meeting. Mr. Krasinski, second by Mrs. Blair. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.